Okay, just the time, to introduce the lead host. So as I was saying, this is the 7th seminar of the I-LanD seminar series, the 2nd edition, and the title of the seminar is Novel Insights in Multimodal Studies. And I was also reminding that the meeting is being recorded because all seminars are uploaded to YouTube for students to rewatch them, because they will have to hand in a report in order to get some academic GFU credits. So I'll take the floor at the end of the seminar, but now I'm happy to introduce today's lead host, Maria Grazia Sindoni. Maria Grazia Sindoni is full professor of English Linguistics and Translation at the University of Messina, Italy. She has published on multimodal critical discourse studies, systemic functional linguistics, pragmatics, and applied linguistics. Her main research interests involve theories and methods to investigate how semiosis or communication works in situated and mediated contexts. Among her research monographs, Spoken and Written Discourse in Online Interactions, a Multimodal Approach, published by Routledge. Our most recent co-edited works are Multimodal Literacies Across Digital Learning Contexts and Mediation and Multimodal Meaning-Making in Digital Environments, both published in the Routledge series in Multimodality series in 2021 with Ilaria Moschini. She has participated in international research projects on multimodality and sociosemiotics as a team member and as the principal investigator. She's currently working on an element research monograph on multimodality and translanguaging in video interaction for Cambridge University Press. Thank you for accepting our invitation, Professor Sindoni, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I would like to thank the seminar's organizer, Giuseppe Valirano and Francesco Nacchia, for inviting me to host this conversation with this splendid lineup of speakers. I have had the pleasure to work with some of them, and I hope we will have other chances to work together in the future. To break the ice, I thought it'd be interesting to give one or two keywords as an entry point, a very personal entry point indeed, to our speakers' research. And now, addressing our speakers, apologies if the keywords that I'll be given in a minute are reductionist in terms of your overall research, especially for very experienced researchers such as Victor and Janina. But these are my personal highlights or entry points to your work, or as I read your work from my personal positioning as a multimodal analyst. But before leaving the floor to our speakers, let me introduce today's topic, novel insights in multimodal studies as well. Anyone vaguely familiar with my research knows that I've always grounded my studies on questions of continuity and change. So I think that to talk about novel insights, we should first ask ourselves where we come from in terms of our own positionalities and background within multimodal studies, and somehow what counts as an old or well-established or traditional approach, and then see what can count as new. And whether new refers to new topics, for example, in terms of what multimodality can do or can assist artificial intelligence models. And this is not a casual example because this is my current research interest. Or whether new refers to new methodologies. And here I see a very interesting interdisciplinary connection, for example, between translanguaging and multimodality. And here you have the first set of keywords for Jenifer. As you may know, multimodality has gained increased currency in Italy in the last few years, especially for people who work in linguistic studies of some kind, people working in English as an additional language, and basically in applied linguistics, I would say. However, there seems to be still an amount of disciplinary confusion, misunderstanding, or vague ideas about what multimodality is, like in sociosemiotic terms, or what multimodality is within our specific community of researchers, and what you can do basically within multimodal approaches to communication. So questions that I've come across over the years are, for example, is multimodality a discipline in its own? Is it a theory? Is it a method? Is it an approach? Which are its epistemological boundaries? My personal answer here is that multimodality is a fully fledged discipline. It is a theory, or better, it is a set of theories and methodologies. So if I mention epistemological questions at this level of abstraction, the entry points to Janina's work come up as the relationship between the theories and empirical methods. But should I reduce this to one keyword? My choice, Janina, would be empirical. And later on, you tell me if you like this keyword here. Our speakers will certainly show the variety and breadth and scope and different approaches that they have. So I would like to share with you my basic idea to see if we have if we agree on some common principles, I would say. First, I think that multimodality should be clearly distinguished from multimedia. There seems to be a lot of misunderstanding here in Italy, I would say, at least when multimodality is quite often misunderstood with the objects of study. Anything that is digital is automatically defined as multimodal. Of course, I'm not saying that the digital is not multimodal, but multimodality, in my view, is an intrinsic feature of human communication. So it's not dependent on the digital or on any other form of materiality. In this light, multimodality is much wider than multimedia and does not have to do with the tools, but rather with the combination or orchestration of semiotic resources such as speech, image, writing, color, gesture, layout, the built environment, and these produce meanings in situated contexts involving social actors at different time scales. Second principle, I understand multimodality as an anti-logocentric movement that is an intellectual effort, at least at the very beginning of the theorization on multimodality, to somehow move the study of human communication away from language alone theories. So this assumption has been historically very important for the development of the discipline, and I see here important connections with systemic functional linguistics and the understanding of language as a social semiotic. So in multimodal theories of semiosis, the study of communication incorporates language, but is not limited to language. And more importantly, language is not foregrounded. There is no a priori resource that is automatically foregrounded in multimodal studies. Hence, no ready-made formula to unpack communicative events. In this sense, I see multimodality as a reformist cultural movement as well, aimed at understanding situated, embodied, and culturally and socially localized or translocalized practices. And this has, of course, a huge impact on education. And here comes the entry point to Victor's research, that is, multimodal pedagogies. And the third point that I would like to draw your attention to is my idea that no text is monomodal. And here I refer to text as conceived of in Michael Halliday's terms, thus not necessarily made up of words of language. My point is that the so-called nonverbal resources can make meanings independently from language, and that anything that conveys a message is intrinsically multimodal. For example, a typical case is like a book is not multimodal without images. A densely written print book is not multimodal, but actually, this is multimodal in my understanding, as it incorporates a set of visual, graphical, typographical resources, such as layout, font use, and other typographical devices, such as the use of bold, italics, spacing, for example. Another idea, another instance could be a body covered with tattoos, which tell a story, much like a visual topography in all its intricacies, or a Gothic church, or a Renaissance statue, or a 3D model are all multimodal artifacts, as they incorporate systems for organizing meanings in patterned and organized ways, or metafunctionally, if you wish, or in ways that allow them to have internal and external coherence. Unfortunately, I'm not very familiar with Sole's work, but as far as I understand, a possible keyword here would be critical. But then, Sole, please, you are welcome to provide better entry points to your work. So before leaving the floor to our speakers in alphabetical order, let me remind you that you are allotted like a 10-minute presentation each, and we kindly ask you not to use a PowerPoint or any other visual material so as to engage the audience in a kind of conversational style rather than a conference kind of a format. So ideally, you are invited to present your current research, and optionally, if you wish, you can tell us if you tend to agree or disagree with me with the areas or points that I raised, the definitions of multimodality and the basic principles that I somehow enucleated. So let me introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Jenifer Ho, is assistant professor at the Department of English, City University of Hong Kong. Her main research interest is video-mediated communication on digital platforms. In particular, she's interested in research in recreational language teaching and learning practices through the lens of multimodality and translanguaging. She also has great interests in the research and use of digital multimodal composing as a pedagogical tool. Her work has appeared in Annual Review of Applied Linguistics, International Journal of Bilingual Education and Bilingualism, Journal of English for Academic Purposes, Journal of Second Language Writing, Language and Intercultural Communication, Qualitative Research, and System. Oh, it's quite a lot. Okay, Jenifer, the floor is open for you.
Thank you, Maria Grazia, for your introduction, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to be here. It's really my pleasure to share my work with you and to get some feedback from you about and exchange ideas, basically. So I would like to start by responding to what Maria Grazia introduced us just now, and I want to mention the importance of continuity and change, which is what which is the center of my work really. It's about the changing communicative practices that we see in our world, and what counts as traditional and new. So my work really centers around two notions. First, multimodality, and second, translanguaging. So I'm trying to find a way to combine them in a fruitful way to understand video-mediated communication. So this question of what is traditional and what is new really means a lot to me. What does it mean by mixing two different theories or approaches or methods or concepts together in order to yield rich findings of modern vernacular communicative practices? So my work focuses on video-mediated communication, and especially in language teaching contexts, as well as vernacular multilingual practices, as seen in videos created by influencers and micro-celebrities. So video allows sign makers to draw on an enlarged repertoire of multimodal resources, and it also increases the possibility for multilingual communication, because these videos are frequently posted online to be consumed by audience from different lingua-cultural backgrounds. So my interest in video-mediated communication really goes beyond the multimodal design of such videos. I'm increasingly interested in how multilingual resources are used in videos as a way for these sign makers to make meaning, which I argue should be paid attention to in light of the global diversity and mobility we are witnessing in the contemporary world. So in my research, I often come across videos of so-called polyglots showcasing their linguistic expertise of using multiple languages in vlogs. And such videos attract a large number of followers to see their linguistic performance. But of course, these performances are not only linguistic performance, but they are also multimodal performance, because you can see how they change the setting of the video. They put in editing effects, post-editing effects to make meaning. So my dual interest in multimodality and multilingual nature of communication has prompted me to go beyond the use of a single framework, resulting in a combination of multimodality and translanguaging in my work. When I say a combination of two frameworks, I don't mean that I have complete mastery of how the two can be combined. There is not one way of combining them. But what I can say is that I see potentials in how they can complement one another to recognize the affordances of the use of different modes, and also the meaning potentials created by the strategic translingual practices of these video bloggers. So as my work is based around video-mediated communication, the analysis goes beyond the use of language naturally. So multimodality allows researchers to analytically focus on the modal and medium affordances in videos, such as embodied, disembodied, and media afforded modes, such as editing effects, camera angle, distance of shot. They are all there to make meaning. And multimodality provides us video-mediated communication researchers with theories, methods, and tools to arrive at a balanced, fine-grained analysis of the resources used, which gives equal status to all modes, moving away from a linguistically focused paradigm of analysis. And multimodality has developed models to understand the potentials of different modes, such as images, colors, gestures, music, and other modes of representation. It also recognizes the agency of sign makers and is based on the notion of motivated sign. So in the context of videos created for transnational communication, content creators have to select apt resources which reflects their interests. So in this selection, content creators need to understand the affordances that each mode offers, and orchestrate them in such a way that what Kress called semiotic harmony can be achieved. And next, I want to briefly talk about what translanguaging is and how it shares similar tenets to multimodality. So a translanguaging framework focuses on the existence of linguistic semiotic resources in a single repertoire. It urges researchers to go beyond multilingual interaction and instead focus our attention to the criticality and creativity in the blending of resources. They could be linguistic resources or other multimodal resources. So language from the perspective of a translanguaging lens is what Li Wei describes as a multilingual, multisemiotic, multisensory, and multimodal resource that human beings use for thinking and for communicating thoughts. So this tenet is very similar to what we have in multimodality. So applying the notion of affordances in multilingual contexts, Mike Bainham and Tongking Li in their book Translation and Translanguaging, they argue that every language has its own affordances, enabling some ways of thinking and disabling some others. So like modes, multimodal content creators, they have to select the most apt linguistic resource to make meaning and as a means for identity performance. Used in the context for analyzing videos created for transnational communication, a translanguaging lens has the potential to provide a nuanced understanding of translinguistic practices and regard the use of different languages as distinct resources for meaning making. So combining multimodality and translanguaging creates a shift in perspective. It extends what we can do as researchers and goes beyond the use of a single framework in understanding the reality. Multimodality adds to translanguaging by bringing a notion of materiality and affordances, both of which contributes to a fine-grained analytical framework to understand the meaning potential of modes beyond language. Translanguaging can also add to add the dimension of situatedness and historicity to the process of sign making. So bridging the notions together can fill in the limitations and inherent in each of these concepts or theories for understanding contemporary communication practices. So as Sharis and Adami observe in their book, in their edited book, research in sociolinguistics and applied linguistics is increasingly acknowledging the multimodality of communication, yet works in these fields adopt an eminently linguistic perspective, which in turn produce or reproduce a power regime that considers language as superordinate of semiosis. On the other hand, multimodality has increasingly developed theories and tools to account for all resources used in communication, but it has not, as Sharis and Adami argues, it has not adequately addressed issues of cross, trans, and intercultural communication. So as we can see by now, both multimodality and translanguaging share the same value of understanding communication as modern language. In my ongoing work with Maria Grazia of examining translingual practices of multilingual influencer, we went into deep discussions on the reach of such an integrated framework. One central question that a combination of these two notions can shed light on is how language-specific resources are activated and made salient in translingual practices in video-mediated communication. The way we have tried combining the two frameworks is through a process of orchestration. So the concept of orchestration is shared by both theories and is essential to understanding how multilingual and multimodal semiotic systems complement one another, each making unique contributions. So to sum up, my work tries to bring the constructs of multimodality and translanguaging into dialogue, and I hope to start a conversation on the possibilities and challenges of integrating the two concepts analytically. I see this as an important paradigm shift to recognize and appreciate the inter or cross-cultural dynamics of meaning making. There is a pressing need for researchers to start experimenting with mixing or combining different paradigms and methodologies, especially when accounting for diverse communicative practices in the world. Developing the competence to appreciate and understand the diverse resources that people draw on to make meaning is essential to effect positive societal changes in light of diversity. Yeah, so that's the end of my sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenifer. That was really brilliant, very important, and I think revealing of the many complex and interlaced forms of interactions between different languages intended as meaning-making resources as well. So now I would like to leave the floor to our second speaker. Let me introduce Victor Lim Fei, who is assistant professor at the Nation. I think there's probably some noise over here. Okay. Sorry. The National Institute of Education, Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, is interested in how and what we should teach learners in today's digital age. He researches and teaches on multiliteracies, multimodal discourse analysis, and digital learning. He's an editor of Multimodality and Society and associate editor of Asia Pacific Journal of Education and Designs for Learning. He's also author of the book Designing Learning with Embodied Teaching Perspectives from Multimodality and lead author of the book Designing Learning for Multimodal Literacy, Teaching, Viewing and Representing, both published in the Routledge Studies in Multimodality. Victor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maria Grazia, for the very kind introduction. Like Jenifer, I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel to have a conversation with all of you here. So thank you very much for the kind invitation to the organizers as well. I see myself really more as an education researcher and an educator. I have started my journey doing multimodal research quite coincidentally, actually. Some more than 20 years ago, I was doing my honors dissertation, and I wanted to look at picture books. And during then, it was in the late 1990s, right? I found that a lot of the studies and research on picture books focus on the narratives and the use of words and ideas, the stories in picture books. And there was very little research on the images, which I thought was puzzling, because if you think about a picture book, the main vehicle for making meaning really would be the images itself. And I was fortunate to be connected with Kay O'Halloran, who was then at my department at the National University of Singapore. And she introduced to me this wonderful new world of multimodality. And I was fortunate enough to attend as a master's student the first symposium of multimodality, which has now become the International Conference on Multimodality. We are going to have our 11th conference in September this year. And during that, my interest really was looking at picture books and thinking about the relationship between language and images in this book. And for me, I felt that was exciting because we were looking at the interplay of meanings, the intersymbiosis of meanings, and how words and images work together to present certain ideologies and values, which were used very much in schools, taught to young children in different parts of the world. So that arose that interest in multimodal research in me. And over the years, after I finished my master's, I went on to become a teacher in the classroom. And I taught for a number of years. I taught advanced English, general paper at a junior college in Singapore. And when Kay reached out to me to do my PhD in 2008, I was very much interested in thinking about what can multimodal research offer for education? What can it inform teaching and learning in the classroom? And in 2008, you will find that multimodal studies were growing to be something that was really very exciting. There was a lot of theories that were developed. While it started very much influenced by systemic functional linguistics, by the time it came to 2008, it was very much I would say there were a number of theoretical positions, and there were a number of methodological approaches that were developed in that field. So I was excited, and I wanted to think about the application of multimodality in the classroom, and particularly the design of learning experiences in the classroom. So for my PhD, what I did was really to think about how the teacher was designing different learning experiences for the students, not just with words, but also with gestures, movement, and the use of space. Now, that was something that was, again, exciting because predominantly, if you're familiar with classroom research, there's a lot of focus on the language that's used by the teacher and the students. So, for instance, the very familiar IRF sequence, where the teacher initiates a question, there's a response by the student, and then there's the feedback by the teacher that's given. So a lot of classroom researchers, when they look at lesson observation, they were paying attention to what the teachers were saying and what the students were responding to. But really, we know that there's a lot more going on in a classroom than just with words alone. And at the same time, there was a lot more use of video data as a way to collect the kind of happenings that is going on in the classroom. And the video data, like what Jenifer mentioned earlier, offers a very, very rich way of us understanding the way different modes are being used in the classroom to make meaning. So essentially for my PhD, that was my focus, looking at the teacher's use of words and how they were orchestrated together with gestures and space, as well as positioning in the design of the learning experience. And as and then after that, of course, I spent a number of years in the education ministry in Singapore, looking after educational technology. And that experience in education ministry, again, reinforced that conviction that I had where the ideas and the good work that is being done in the field of multimodality needs to be applied into the context of teaching and learning so that we are able then to inform the way we teach and we learn. So that, in a nutshell, is the kind of background that I come from. So now I've been with the National Institute of Education for a number of years, and my research centers on the two big questions. The first is, what should we be teaching our young people in today's digital age? And the second will be, how should we be teaching our young people in today's digital age? And for me, I try to respond to these two questions through the lens of multimodality. And through my work, what I try to do really is to advance that so-called applicable multimodality, where multimodal research theories and methods can be applied meaningfully in the context of education. So what does this mean when we talk about multimodality in education? Maybe I would categorize them in relation to three big categories: curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment. And my argument really is that in each of these three categories or three spheres, the recognition of multimodal meaning making can transform the way we have been conceiving traditional education. So let's talk about curriculum. Back in 1996, some of you may be familiar. You will have read of the manifesto that's published by the New London Group. So the New London Group were a group of academics, including Günter Kress, Bill Cope, Mary Calantis, Alan Luke, and a number of others who came together and asked themselves the question. Then they were thinking about the globalizing world, the world that was being globalized, the advancement that were made in digital technologies. And they asked themselves, what does it mean to be literate in the 21st century? So the New London group presented a manifesto that introduced to the world the notion of multiliteracies and made a very convincing argument that to be literate in the world today, we need to move beyond a focus and a privileging of language learning to include the other modes of meaning making as well, to include the knowledge, skills, competence to be able to view the range of multimodal texts that we see in digital media, to be able also to represent meanings in a contextually appropriate ways, again, with the range of modes that is at our disposal. Now, the New London Group's work has been extremely influential. You will know that many education systems in Australia, including the one in Singapore, has reformed our literacy curriculum such that literacy today is no longer seen as just focusing on language learning, but also include multimodal meaning making, or what I call multimodal literacy, the importance of being able to make meaning with a whole range of different modes in addition to language. And I have a project in Singapore on multiliteracies, and the core focus of the project really is to develop ways in which teachers are able to guide students in the learning of viewing and representing as new literacy skills. So how do they work with multimodal meaning making? So some of the understanding that have been derived from the project includes the importance of developing a meta language so that they present themselves as a resource for teachers and students to think and talk about multimodal meaning making in the classroom. So thinking about how images, gestures, animation work meaning, as well as develop a whole range of multimodal pedagogies, including the use of digital multimodal composing in the classroom as a way to provide opportunities for students to develop these literacies. So that's in relation to curriculum. The second category, very quickly, that I want to talk about is the area of pedagogy. And as I mentioned just now, the recognition that I take really is the perspective of teachers being designers of learning experiences. And as a designer, they will orchestrate their use of semiotic resources. So if you ask a child, why do they like a specific teacher? Who is their favorite teacher and why do they like this teacher? Well, many a times it's not just what the teacher says, but also how the teacher acts, the way the teacher moves. And what I wanted to do through my PhD project and also in the book on embodied teaching is to draw attention to how the orchestration of both corporal semiotic resources such as gestures and positioning, as well as semiotic technologies ranging from the whiteboard, the PowerPoint slides, the various platforms that you use in the classroom are tools and resources in which you can use to design the learning experiences for the students. And that I see as an important part of how the research and studies in multimodality can inform the pedagogy, the teaching of teachers, how the teachers can teach in the classroom. And of course, nowadays you recognize as well that AI is advancing at a rapid pace. The world is very much involved in a huge conversation with regard to the use of ChatGPT in teaching and learning and the implications that it has. One of the reflection I had in a commentary on ChatGPT that's published in the Singapore newspapers really is that ChatGPT invites us, in fact, it demands for us to rethink the way we think about assessment, the way we begin to think about the way we assess our students. Now, the final point that I want to make really is the category of assessment. And again, you will find that while in many systems, including Singapore, the curriculum and the pedagogy may have shifted towards an inclusion of multimodal meaning making, the assessment tend to still privilege language very much, tend to be still very much language based. And we have done some studies that shows that. But really, when we adopt a multimodal lens on assessment, we need to begin to recognize that the kind of literacy practices that our young people engage in and the way they are using the whole range of semiotic resources to express their ideas and their identities are beyond just a focus on language as well. So for instance, when they begin to build virtual worlds in Minecraft, when they begin to compose videos on YouTube, when they begin to make TikTok videos or upload posts on Instagram, they are not frivolous activities, but they are also literacies that are demonstrated through these practices or these communicative practices that young people are engaged in. So the heart of assessment really is about, therefore, recognizing these practices and begin to value these literacy practices in the classroom. And of course, when we begin to recognize and value these literacy practices, the question of educational justice becomes very important, because then we begin to start asking questions of what, as teachers, we are doing to support students who may not be so savvy with these literacy practices that their peers may be involved in. What are we doing to help students to have access to devices, tools, and technologies and resources so that they are able to be given opportunities to demonstrate these literacy practices as well? So I guess in a nutshell, what I'm fundamentally interested in is the application of multimodal studies in education. And I've shared with you how this can look in the area of curriculum, in the area of pedagogy and assessment. And of course, this has been a very, I think, high-level sort of discussion. I look forward to coming into conversation with you if you're interested in specific aspect that we can take up and talk about a little bit more later. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Victor. It was really, really interesting, and you were able to unpack all the different segments of your research and how this integrates with the important questions that we have today, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think that this is particularly important for teachers, but for parents, for children as well. But let's now move to our next speaker. Let me introduce Janina Wildfeuer, who is an assistant professor in the interdisciplinary program, Communication and Information Studies at the University of Groningen, the Netherlands, where she mainly focuses on the development of appropriate methods for the empirical analysis of a broad range of multimodal artifacts. Her work so far concentrated mainly on films and TV series, comics, computer games, and social media. Her publications include a monograph on film discourse interpretation, 2014 Routledge, several edited collections, and the two co-authored textbooks, Multimodality, 2017 De Gruyter, and Multimodaliteit, apologies, Janina, 2020 De Gruyter. Janina is one of the chief editors of the journal Visual Communication and an associate editor in the Frontier section on multimodality of communication. Janina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria Grazia, and thank you all for the invitation. I also very much appreciate being part of this specific format. We don't have these kinds of forums and open spaces to talk so often, right? So this is really a nice idea and initiative. Yes, so I liked your introduction of yourself, so I came up with some very spontaneous ideas just now. And Maria Grazia said a bit of this already. So I also rather coincidentally started doing multimodality after meeting John Bateman. And once you get to know John, you cannot stop anymore doing this, right? So I came with a very traditional linguistic and semiotic background, and when I left Bremen after a very long time, I now see myself as a full multimodalist, no longer doing traditional linguistics and semiotics, but still including theories and methods from these fields, right? So maybe as another interesting anecdote, my PhD time was affected very strongly already from an interdisciplinary context in a doctoral group on film analysis, but I was the only linguist or semiotician in there, in the group of doctoral students. There were quite many literary scholars, media scholars, and also cultural analytical scholars. So I was taught to think interdisciplinary from the very beginning, and this will also be the main idea I will be pushing here now in my short statement. I started working on film initially and then quickly expanded the analytical focus to many other artifacts. Maria has mentioned this: comics, games, TV series, and always trying to look at the possibilities of applying all the methods and tools we were developing. As you might know, John Bateman's work is seen as very much foundational, with a lot of terminology work, definitory work, working on concepts, also from an ontological perspective. I have been trying to contribute to this, but also always with this analytical view on doing really empirical analyses. And I thank you, Maria Grazia, for making this my keyword, the empirical. This is also one of the points I wanted to address from the very beginning. So I prepared two different aims and objectives, and one of them was empirical. But I will mention both of them and also say something about both of them. So I see them as rather future steps and developments to be pushed further. So something we are doing right now initially, and that we need to do even further and even more. So on the one hand, I think that we are currently striving towards what John has called a meta methodology of multimodality, bringing out something more out of what we already have after these decades of multimodality research. And at the same time, we are currently facing a clear need for reconceptualizing our analytical practices in multimodality research. And I provocatively now call this the empirical turn in multimodality. It's not the first time I say this, but pushing it even further. So I start with this empirical idea. I see both points as strongly interwoven, as mutually dependent on each other, but at the same time with lots of potential for individuals to work on individual projects. So let's start with this individual project work. And maybe we can just put it here, empirical, as the starting point. There is already clearly a trend towards more empirical approaches, and we have been calling for even more empirical data-based and data-driven analyses for a couple of years now. But I still think that there is a lot more to do. We have focused on qualitative analyses of examples, case studies, for quite some time. I mean, that was challenging enough, right, to address the complexity of artifacts, and we are still dealing with the increasing complexity nowadays. But I think that there's now time for large-scale corpora and even broader and more empirical setups, also including larger user studies, more tentative experiments, really asking also people, non-academics, non-multimodalists, what they think of our analyses and of the hypothetical interpretations we come up with. We have been calling this the move from theory to data, but I still think that the move hasn't fully taken place yet. We have done some analyses about journals and publications, how they include this steady increase in empirical work, but it also includes a lot of still explorative, descriptive, and interpretative studies with comparably small data sets. And I blame myself for this, because I preach the empirical turn, but still not. I'm still not involved in larger projects, which is needed for this to be able to fully analyze large corpora. So this is something I see myself pushing towards. And then speaking very practically, what do we need for this is then a main question, right? So one thing is, of course, getting access to the corpora, collecting data, having them somewhere, and then being able to address them. I mean, we are still talking about annotation tools, semi or fully automatic annotation or analysis. That's still all in development. So this is something we really should strive for. We need to develop more knowledge of how to collect data efficiently and find new ways of collecting data. And yes, this is still challenging for many multimodal artifacts. Just as an example, I'm currently collaborating with a student who was very keen on supporting me in collecting Instagram stories and TikTok videos, saying, well, there's so many different tools that are able to scrape the data already massively. And then we are still stopping at the very same moment all the time. We either have the language in the captions, or we either have some videos, but not the complexity of this whole setup of the whole communicative situation. We still struggle with combining these different data sets efficiently, and yeah, there's still a lot to do. As a consequence, this will surely also call for the use of newer and newest technologies, the use of automatic tools that we are not using yet for the scraping of data. And this clearly needs knowledge that we might not have. And I'm, again, very honest here, I don't have this knowledge either. I might know what I want to have in the end, but I don't know all the details about the tools that we need to use for this. On the other hand, we also need to put more emphasis on our overall quality of the analysis and evaluate our analysis carefully. So we can, on the one hand, of course, aim for large corpora, large-scale analyses, but are we then objective enough to compile these analyses? Are our analyses reliable? Bring they validity? Are they practicable? What is it really? What does it look like when we work with a large corpus? Can we really get to similar results still that still relate to the hypothesis we have from our qualitative analysis? There's also a question of fairness. Is it really balanced? Whether we see all the results for the whole corpus? Are we biased there? And ending this here with, again, a view of the plenty of disciplines that have been doing empirical studies for a long time and that might not yet be multimodality ready. We need to take their knowledge and expertise into account when developing our analyses further. And that means that we should actually welcome all those disciplines that are currently approaching multimodal analysis and really see and ask which knowledge they bring with them, which tools they have. For example, for the collection of verbal data, for the collection of recipient data, participant data in terms of questionnaire studies, experimental setups. How can these be adjusted? Which other knowledge is needed? All in all, for this empirical, finding effective ways of interdisciplinary collaboration to expand what we currently have as quantitative work. So that was the one point. And connected with this, as I mentioned already, there is this need to develop further what we currently call multimodality. And Maria Grazia, you also had the question whether multimodality is a discipline or a method, an approach, or a set of theories. I myself have pushed the conceptualization of multimodality as a discipline on its own quite strongly, always seeing it as a very interdisciplinary discipline or even transdisciplinary discipline, including many different insights from different other disciplines. However, most recently, John has, for example, called multimodality no longer as a research field or discipline on its own, but rather as a stage of development within fields or within a specific field. So realizing that many different fields, as I just mentioned, fields and disciplines now enter their own multimodal phase, their own multimodal turn with new interest in phenomena they have been analyzing, but in the multimodality of these phenomena. Just two very random examples, actually, the interest in archaeology and ancient studies to look at all the visual and audio, if available, the audiovisual aspects of their analytical objects, the visual aspects of monuments, statues, in relation to, for example, the verbal resources or the spatial resources they have been addressing, and then to address the different levels of knowledge that are or are not available for the understanding of these aspects in different time periods, just one discipline or one field. Then what you mentioned already, Maria Grazia, the multimodal turn, if we want, in artificial intelligence and information studies more broadly, that calls for more and more knowledge about the relation between different modes, not just the automatic detection of some of them, but really their relation. We've talked about ChatGPT, we haven't talked about DALL-E and DALL-E's problems of combining text and image. There's quite a lot to do when we look at our huge efforts and achievements in text-image relations. That's not yet there in the automatic tool, right? So the knowledge we have needs to be fed into neural networks for the automatic construction of not only images, but then multimodal artifacts. We could basically observe lists of tools coming up now after ChatGPT was published for the automatic creation of images, videos, other multimodal artifacts, but with this, the problems that exist still in these accounts. So there are not only these two disciplines, but many different disciplines that currently all commit to the development of multimodality research as a very, very broad context, maybe a stage of development within their fields, maybe something else, by bringing their own theoretical principles and methodological tools, and then dealing with the principles and tools that multimodality research has been developing. By looking at what is existing and what needs to be adjusted, and by looking at what we as multimodalists have to offer and what can be done with this combination. So I see this also as a problem at the same time, because it brings with it not only an immense breadth of potential analytical objects, but also meta-methodological issues, as John has called it. How do we bring these different approaches together? What is our common thread? What are the shared ideas? What are similarities? What are differences? Where can we connect and also then efficiently connect and not just exist in parallel, but triangulate if you want? So the resulting challenge then is that we need to find ways of combining all these insights from these various theoretical and methodological backgrounds that are brought along by the disciplines. And this is not what Jenifer has called experimenting with different methods. I think it's more. I think it's really going from dialogue to cooperation to hopefully implementation and fusion, if you want, really being very creative in getting together and getting along together. One suggestion for this is, well, keeping up with what John has said here, develop a meta methodology to find common languages, or if you want, meta languages. Victor has worked on this for the pedagogical context, but there's many different contexts for which we should develop these meta languages. I will not say something about the background. I mean, we probably all know that it's coming a bit from legitimation code theory and sociology, this idea of distinguishing different external languages of description that are able to organize the data, the objects of investigation, without putting one specific theory of one discipline onto these things, but really developing something external to be able to include as many different perspectives. And I think that this is one big task for multimodality right now, that we clearly have to identify the different strong strands and subjects in multimodality research and see what other disciplines can add to this, can contribute, and what can then be developed as something coming from internal and being an external description. And then we are back to the beginning. Basically, an important basis for this is, of course, that we see multimodality research not as something coming from one specific discipline, linguistics, social semiotics, communication study, but really being a clearly interdisciplinary endeavor. And more importantly, then also an integrationist interdisciplinary endeavor. This is what Theo van Leeuwen has called or has pushed, right? Not fighting for the dominance of specific concepts, but really finding commonalities, interrelations, fruitful combinations, and with this then developing meta-theoretical and meta-methodological ideas. Let me, as a final thing, once more quote John when calling this a multimodal task from the ground up, as I said, from internally developing it into something externally. I find this a very exciting context. Maybe being taught to be interdisciplinary from the very beginning. This might bring challenges for many people, being afraid of new things, getting out of their familiar context, of course. But I think this is really where we now have to go and be open and be welcoming each other and talking to each other and then going along. So a very strong plea for this here from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janina, for leading us into this wonderful journey into multimodality in its many components and theoretical and I would say epistemological questions in our in this very wide domain. I agree with you. I think that we should rethink the idea itself of epistemology and perhaps getting back to the basics, as John would say, just starting seeing phenomenologies and then going rethinking ontologies. So that would be like an interesting and truly interdisciplinary enterprise. So now, last but not least, we have Sole Alba Zollo, our speaker and lecturer of English linguistics and translation at the University of Naples Federico II, Italy. She holds a PhD in English for special purposes from the University of Naples Federico II. She has published on her research interests, which include human rights discourse, multimodal critical discourse analysis in institutional contexts, rhetoric and visual argumentation, education and social media, the language of tourism, and new literacies. She has published See Britain by Train, a diachronic multimodal critical discourse analysis of tourist railway posters with Loffredo in 2018, and Promotion, Popularization and Pedagogy, an analysis of the verbal and visual strategies in the COE's human rights campaigns with Cambridge scholars in 2013. Sole, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the organizers, Giuseppe Balirano and Francesco Nacchia, for inviting me. And thank you I'm very happy to be part of this seminar and to share my studies with such great experts on multimodal studies. So actually, I'm also a little bit nervous. Okay, so by referring to Lagerfeld Johnson's conceptual metaphor, love is a journey, I'd like to say that for me, multimodal research is a journey. And we know that in cognitive linguistics, the term journey is considered as a path schema. That means it includes a starting point, and a destination, a path, and a direction. So I'm going to briefly illustrate the beginning of this journey, of my journey, some of the path that I followed, but unlikely or probably maybe likely, I don't know, today I'm not able to share with you my ending point, my final destination. Starting with my starting point, more than 10 years ago, during my PhD program, I carried out research on the Council of Europe's public campaigns aiming at identifying the linguistic and visual means of persuasion used to promote and disseminate human rights protection. At that time, I decided to investigate from a multimodal perspective, multimodal discourse analysis perspective, different text types, in particular posters, leaflets, video clips, and booklets, and highlighted different elements, in particular that I call the 3 Ps, popularization, promotion, and pedagogy. Then I decided to focus on 3 points, or if I want to try to get it more metaphorical, I decided to explore 3 locations: popularization, transmodal storytelling, and multimodal argumentation. And concerning this last point, recently I also examined a sample of public service announcements on mental disability collected from the websites of 2 non-profit organizations, one Canadian and the other one American. And the research aimed to explore how these 2 non-profit organizations promote diversity and inclusion through multimodal argumentative persuasive techniques, and also to what extent multimodal argumentation contributes to fighting stigma and discrimination. So most of the time in my research, I have to admit, I combine multimodal discourse analysis, in particular social semiotics approach, and critical discourse analysis. Then I tried to combine also social media studies and multimodality. So after a diversion on the language of a tourist in social media, and in particular on how nowadays travel Instagrammers have contributed to redefine the discourse of tourists, I decided to focus on online hate speech against female politicians. So by collecting a corpus of YouTube multimodal data, my colleague Eleonora Esposito and I decided to explore and contextualize online misogyny as a techno-social phenomenon, applying a social media critical discourse studies approach. So mapping a vast array of discursive strategies, in particular strategies of body shaming, of gender stereotyping and gatekeeping, strategies of moral degradation, and also strategies of direct threatening and abuse. This study offered an analysis on how technology-facilitated gender-based violence contributes to discursively constructing the political arena as a fundamentally male-oriented space and reinforces stereotypical and sexist representation of women in politics. We also identified multimodal strategies of digital technology-facilitated violence, and we identified these resources, multimodal resources, not only in the videos under investigation, but also in the comment section, in particular in the form of emoticons and emojis. So in our corpus, many derogatory comments and body shaming comments are complemented by visual markers of disagreement, by emoticons and emojis. Then this route has gently guided me to explore the so-called organizational semiotics, which combines 2 large and separate fields: organization studies and multimodal social semiotics. So multimodal communication, we know that is not only an output of organizations, but it is constitutive of that. So the rich analytical and theoretical resources of multimodal perspectives on organizations can and should make a fundamental contribution to our understanding of organizations in social life. And so, for example, just to give an example, I decided to analyze Philip Morris International website, we know which is the biggest company, tobacco company in the world. And I decided to focus on multimodal storytelling strategies and to see how different modes interrelate to create a persuasive message and convey a new image of corporate identity based on social responsibility. Then at a certain point, I decided to follow another path that I decided to focus on multimodal literacies and started to explore this field. And we know that the advancements in digital technologies have changed what it means to be both a language teacher and a language learner. So teachers nowadays are aware that they need to integrate multiple modes into their practice. So a few years ago, I decided to explore whether transmodal storytelling, for example, can become a didactic instrument in an EFL classroom, in particular with students viewed at risk of falling behind in school, and if we can improve their language skills and creative capacities. So in order to test the effectiveness of transmodal storytelling in the teaching and learning process, I carried out a preliminary empirical study on a group of 7-year-old students in an Italian state primary school. And then the research actually argued that transmodal storytelling could in a way rejuvenate literacy in classrooms. More recently, I focused on multimodal literacies in higher education, and particularly on eco-literacy. So by combining this time social semiotics and positive discourse analysis, I decided to collect, investigate a sample of didactic materials retrieved from the European Union's website, the Learning Corner, to promote eco-literacy among the young. And I decided actually to divide this research in two parts. So the first phase of the research was devoted to the analysis and identification of the most significant multimodal strategies that are able to encourage positive discourses on ecology in a class of undergraduate students. And then I decided to conduct an empirical, just last year, to conduct an empirical study with a group of students in order to observe the response to the European Union resources and their capability to propose alternative local green actions. So about 95 students took part in the project. And what is very interesting in particular, the second part of the project, because they were stimulated to suggest concrete examples of green projects at the local level. And then, for example, they created apps, ecological apps, or brochures, informative brochures, or also they imagined some events. So it was, they at the end, they in a way, they contributed to building, if you want, a more sustainable future by identifying possible discursive solutions. And the results of this research will be soon published in a volume edited by two colleagues, Maria Bortoluzzi and Elisabetta Azzurro, within the book series Bloomsbury Advances in Ecolinguistics. And my last part that I'd like to share with you today is I started to explore the use of social media in class. So we know that most students have mobile phones. They use them all the time. Even when we are in class, they constantly get distracted. And so I started, there are many studies on that already, but I decided to say if what happens if I try to use social media in class, and if it can be an instrument to develop their multimodal critical thinking. So following a previous empirical study on the use of Instagram in class, I tried to, now with my recent study, to implement the investigation by designing a TikTok-based class experiment, and they're trying to answer three main research questions. How does the use of TikTok affect students' learning process and improve their critiques of specialized discourses? What are students' attitudes towards TikTok as a pedagogical tool? And can TikTok be used as academic tools to apply the theoretical concept discussed in class? I conducted this experiment in empirical study last semester in a class of undergraduate students. 174 students decided to take part in the project, and it's an in-progress work. I collected all the assignments because they had to produce 6 assignments in total, and where they had to develop a different topic concerning the language of advertising in tourism as a specialized language, explained in class during the semester, and then also create visual and verbal content that we shared on a TikTok account. Of course, I just collected now the assignments, and then I need to analyze and then to write down the article that probably will be submitted by late spring. Then what about now the last point of my journey? So the final destination ending point. As I told you before, I don't know yet. I don't know what my final destination is, but I'd like to share you just two very last considerations. Although there are many studies on multimodality, many studies have been published, I think that probably there aren't enough studies that try to combine a critical approach to challenge common sense assumptions and the more empirical one to detect practical solutions. Just to give you an example, ecolinguistics, for example, is still limited to the discussion of the relation between language and ecology, often from a critical perspective, and also probably also from a multimodal perspective, rather than designing alternative discourses aimed at promoting more environmentally conscious practice. And also another point, my last point, of course, we need to implement cross-disciplinary studies, but probably in particular, we need to try to work more with educators, practitioners, and decision makers. And probably we should try to be less scholars, less researchers, and more practitioners ourselves. So probably I think that now this moment, it isn't enough to be activists just raising awareness on some topical issues through our research, but probably we need more and more to promote and to propose concrete actions. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Sole. Thank you for your presentation. So now I think that I can perhaps ask a question to all speakers. I'm picking up from several ideas that you mentioned, several concepts that we could discuss a bit further. In particular, thinking about what could be the next, the future of this, let's call it discipline, research strand or domain. I think that there's a lot going on in the context of the development of artificial intelligence models. And I think that this specific area here is particularly interesting in the context of our own take of multimodality. And if I say our take, I take the stand of a sociosemiotic perspective on multimodality. It's not the multimodality that is within computer science. It is a different way of looking at how data combine together, how they produce meaning in socially situated contexts. So I don't know if you agree, but I see a sort of a paradox going on at the moment, because there's this huge explosion and refinement of artificial intelligence models, richer and more refined data sets. So the problem of how to construct corpora could be somehow benefit from the ideas and from the, let's say, technological advancements that we have from like computer science, visual analysts, data retrieval, big data, visual analytics. But at the same time, I see a sort of what I could call, perhaps paraphrasing Janina, the linguistic turn, or linguistics comes back with a vengeance, because you see that basically most data sets are unimodal. So what we have today is a sort of a communicative scenario where a lot in terms, for example, of automatic recognition of problematic contents. Sole was talking about misogyny, these different or problematic or dangerous contents, as well as in the sense of like ethical problems that may arise from, for example, having interactions with chatbots that are more human-like than ever, or all the problems resulting from the development of ChatGPT that is incredibly refined and somehow human-like, at least to a certain extent. So my question is, how can we somehow establish a dialogue with people from computer science, and how can we bring in our knowledge, our view of communicative scenario in an age where everything seems somehow much easier in terms of data collection and in terms of the facilitation of process somehow imitating the human mind, while at the same time having this, what I call the sort of a paradox of this growing separation between different multimodal resources analyzed by these automatic artificial intelligence driven models. I'm sorry, this is incredibly intricate. I don't know if this makes any sense, but like to say this is in very, very short terms. The problem that I see here is the fact that materials used for data sets are mostly linguistic. So how can we somehow help or assist or complement methods, techniques used to develop artificial intelligence models from our perspective?
Can I say something?
Sure.
Yes. Let me call it very naively a learning by doing that I think is AI currently doing. Learning a lot, of course, from doing computational analyses of, for example, texts, well, whatever, but and also approaching multimodal data and developing very little steps that of course contribute to their knowledge. Just as an example, we've recently discussed with computational scholars who do multimodal argumentation analysis, working with annotations by participants saying this is a very persuasive image. And the problem from a multimodal perspective was that the image mainly contained written text. So was not an image in our multimodality perspective of really having pictorial graphic content, but having written language in different colors and maybe then a diagram or so. So a different understanding of the medium or the artifact. I think what we could do, seeing ourselves as teachers maybe or doctors, treating them as scholars, maybe patients, learning their things by doing, struggling, and then showing them exactly what the problem is. That sounds a bit arrogant, but isn't that what we are doing? I mean, I saw myself in this perspective talking to these people saying, wow, the computational aspect is very convincing, but I have a very, very, very strong issue with your understanding of images and your understanding of multimodality. So here's mine. Does that give you any support? Does that help you in going on? And I think there's still a quite challenging demand of being, of course, kind and trying to be nice and not criticizing them all the time. But I think that we could see this as being somehow teachers or doctors pointing them to little arrows they have and showing them that going a different way would maybe improve their results even further. Not saying that they're not doing well, but I'm not a teacher, a teaching expert, so maybe Victor has something to say here. But I think that we shouldn't preach them theories and methods, but really working with them in the analyses and with the examples and showing, hey, wow, yes, but, and then maybe show our perspective and our analysis with the qualitative analysis that we can provide already, and then say, why not bring this together, right? So this is a very practical, non-didactic approach, as a suggestion.
Yes, and this could also be interpreted, as you said before in your talk, as or points to the need to develop a meta-language. So the meta-language is key to this process, I would say.
Yes.
If I may pick up on what has been shared, really interesting sharing from all four of you, and I would just want to perhaps resonate with what Janina has mentioned with regard to the idea of us looking beyond the community of multimodalists ourselves and engaging with the other disciplines. So I'm intrigued with the idea of that you mentioned about how there's a multimodal turn that's happening across the different disciplines. And of course, many of us, we are trained in multimodal studies, but we are also situated in other contexts of inquiry as well. So for instance, I think together with Jenifer and Sole, we are looking at education. And Maria Grazia, when you asked about the future of multimodality, yes, certainly we do want to do what Janina has hinted out, the importance of developing the meta methods and the meta theory to advance the understanding. But the other aspect which I hope to see in the future of multimodality is that we are able to apply a lot more of what we have developed over the decades into the different contexts, into the different disciplines. They are experiencing their own multimodal turn that Janina has mentioned. I was inspired very much when I attended a lecture by Michael Halliday, I think one of his last lectures, where he talks about the notion of applicable linguistics, and he made a statement about how the value of a theory is the use that it can be made of it. And that stuck with me, and I thought, again, the kind of value that multimodal theories can bring to the other contexts. So relating to the idea of artificial intelligence, I suppose one of the contributions we can make as multimodalists in the context of when we think about artificial intelligence in education is to offer a more considered set of understanding for the educators when they are using artificial intelligence in the classroom. So for instance, recognizing the way, so the notion of semiotic technologies proposed by Van Leuven and Kay O'Halloran as well as Emilia Jonov is productive in a sense where we recognize that the tools and resources that we bring and we use are never neutral, isn't it? They influence the way we represent ideas and knowledge. They shape the kind of pedagogic relations that's happening in the classroom, and of course, it contributes to the whole design of the learning experience. And if we apply the lens of multimodality towards the use of these tools that we bring including those new and exciting tools that are emerging, I think that will be a helpful set of considerations for educators when they are thinking about the kind of resources they have in the design of learning experiences, which is what I'm really interested in through the work that I do. I wonder whether Jenifer or Sole has anything else to add to this.
Yeah, so I would like to pick up on what Victor said. I remember in your sharing, you mentioned that we should try to develop new assessment practices in the face of these new technologies coming into our classroom. So instead of seeing those technology as evil or something that need to be kept out of the classroom, I think the future would be to, as Janina said, to learn how this technology works understand the affordances of these technologies. For example, how can AI be used to help, let's say, L2 writing? Are there any benefits for students to make use of this technology and combine them with other semiotic technologies in the classroom that we can combine in a meaningful way to create or design a learning environment for students that aligns with what's happening in the outside world? So one major argument that I've been advocating in my work is that this artificial divide between what's inside of the classroom and what's outside of the classroom needs to be, we can't think of them as separate spaces anymore, because what happens outside of the classroom, new technologies developing outside, would eventually have an impact on what students can do inside the classroom. And I think as educators, as designers of learning environment, we should embrace this new trend. So one way is, as I said, to learn about the affordances or constraints of this tool. So about the future of multimodality, I agree with all of you that we should think about how multimodality can be combined with other disciplines who also have shared interests or shared principles of looking at communicative practices and develop meta language and find a way to cooperate with these other approaches. Yeah, so I think what Zollo said about a critical multimodality would be a trend that we are moving into, especially nowadays. We have so many misinformation, fake news. So one very important competency that students need to develop is to distinguish between what's real and what's fake, and that is a kind of critical multimodal competence. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, I agree with all of you, what you said. And I'd say that apart from being critical, probably also being positive could be just another key element. Because in terms of course, a positive discourse analysis does mean that it's just a complement, not a critical discourse analysis. And so the fact that probably we need to, and probably here I'm just repeating the same concept I already said, but probably we need also to propose more concrete actions. So in this way, probably could be the future of also multimodality. Concerning that, I want to share you just something that I read a couple of days ago. It was a piece of news, something that happened here in Napoli. A woman was arrested because accused of killing her 2-year-old child, and actually she was found on the seafront of a town near Naples with her dead son. And it seems that she confessed her murder, but she didn't remember anything. During the trial, the prosecutor thinks that the woman's act was premeditated. And in order to support this theory, they showed some WhatsApp messages that the woman sent to her husband before the tragedy. But according to her lawyers, these messages have been decontextualized because they didn't take into account the emojis and emoticons that were there in the text. So, I mean, this story just struck me because it means that there is no awareness that in that case, I mean, we understand that how the interpretation of multimodal semiotic resources become fundamental in that case to establish if a violent act violent justice premeditated or not. And so I was thinking, okay, we know that we have forensic linguistics, no, for years now. And we know that forensic linguists are very good at analyzing phonetics, syntax, semantics, so linguistics, in order to analyze language in a legal settings. But probably we need nowadays also forensic multimodal linguist, forensic multimodal analyst. And so I don't know, I had the perception, the feeling that there is still a gap. And probably, I don't know, the real world doesn't know that we exist, no, as a multimodal analyst. Probably we could make a contribution, no, to some context and in some settings. I don't know, just I don't know. For me, it was quite peculiar, no, that during the trial they debate and they say, okay, but they didn't take into account emojis, emoticons, and so there is a different version. So an act was premeditated or not, based on that, and just they didn't care about the presence of emojis and emoticons.
Yes, this is very, very interesting. Thanks for sharing this story with us. So now, if you agree, I would open the floor for questions. If someone from the audience, if I can say audience, this chance to ask questions to this group of wonderful scholars. No questions?
While we wait for them to formulate their questions, maybe I also would like to add to what Sole has mentioned. And I thought the point that you have made about moving beyond critique is worth, of course, reinforcing. I think Günter Kress himself described how the enterprise of critique or critical discourse analysis, in that sense, is retrospective. Looking back at what has been done, and then, of course, in a sense, identifying how it can be made better. Instead, he proposed the notion of design, which he described as prospective and empowering. And I guess this also relates back to what I have mentioned earlier on, the manifesto by the New London Group. And one of the key ideas really in the notion of multiliteracies is to empower the young people to become designers of their social futures. And drawing again from the work of Günter Kress and Stefan Solander, I found the idea of teachers designing learning experiences to be a very powerful idea as well, beyond, of course, seeing themselves as stage on the stage, or even just facilitators of learning, but really recognizing their role in orchestrating the range of semiotic resources, be it both semiotic technologies as well as their bodily resources in designing learning experiences. I think that is a lot more empowering, and that is one of the ways in which we can see the contributions of the knowledge, the understanding that we have in multimodal studies come to bear in various contexts.
And if I can just add, I'm sorry to interrupt you, I'll be very quickly. I see also some interesting connections here with theories of translanguaging, because the manifesto, the New London Group manifesto, resonates in many of the, let's say, classic works in translanguaging theories. For example, I'm thinking of Li Wei's idea of a practical theory of translanguaging, the importance of empowering learners, of empowering sign makers. And another very interesting bit here that I see in terms of connection is the idea that translanguaging, just using or being able to switch from one language to another in a smooth and continuous way, it can be perhaps considered as a way of using different meaning-making resources. Because as far as I know, in, let's say, traditional classic multimodal analysis, language is mostly seen in speech and writing. And I say so because in most transcription, because I did a lot of transcriptions in my life. And you know what? I've seen a lot of transcriptions mostly based in the classic distinction of speech and writing as the two fundamental resources for language or languages. I had a lot of very inspiring discussions with Jenifer about this. We talked a lot about this, but we, in our empirical, in our empirical work with translanguaging practices, we noticed that using several languages, interlacing these complex linguistic repertoires cannot be understood as like a single unified form of semiosis. So this is then again a way to somehow develop a form of somehow, I don't know if I can say this, like extending theories or adding new conceptualizations in terms of how language is considered as a resource, not just a language as a block, but each language, each named language and each variety. I think this is another very interesting new frontier in terms of interdisciplinary work. Francesco, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you for the fascinating talks. And I have a question that it's more like a comment for Sole Alba, because I'm familiar with work with students at L'Orientale about their projects with Instagram. So you developed that project and they used Instagram for sharing content. And I understand that you don't have maybe you're still gathering data for this project, but does it follow the same procedure, the same principles of the past project you developed here at L'Orientale?
You mean the TikTok one? Was it
the Instagram? The one you
the previous one was on Instagram, but last semester I decided to use TikTok in class.
Oh, I don't know anything about that. I read the one about Instagram.
Because it was 2019. But last semester I decided to conduct a similar experiment in class with undergraduate students again. But I decided to use TikTok. Actually, it wasn't me to decide, but the students decided to choose to use TikTok, because it seems nowadays it is the most popular, among them. And basically, yes, the methodology and also the design of the experiment is more or less the same. Even if this time they had fewer assignments, just 6 assignments. The previous one there were 7 assignments, and they produce more videos, of course, because they had to be shared.
With TikTok.
With TikTok. And yes, but I haven't the results yet. Because, this time many students decided to take part, more than 175 students. And so I just gathered the materials, but I need now to analyze and investigate and to all the videos, and then try to see what kind of results I can get. Yeah.
Great. Really curious to read the results.
Okay. Thank you very much, Francesco. Thank you.
Okay, are there other questions, comments?
Here I am. I just wanted to thank everybody. That was quite interesting. That was very, very interesting, especially because you touched upon so many different things. And what was beautiful is that you all have different backgrounds, and the way you were able to somehow sew them together into something which is very interesting for all of us. The very, very initial question was, what's next, but you actually touched upon that too, especially when Maria Grazia was trying to lead you towards artificial intelligence. And I saw there a lot of effort to dig in something which is not easy, of course, for us, but of course, possibly multimodality is the answer. Engineer and all those interested in trying to understand the way the world is going to somehow, the direction the world is going to take, would do nothing without somebody who critically would understand the way, and especially how to see the dots somehow match, and so see the whole picture, basically. I think this is what multimodality does. As also Alba was trying to say with the example taken from the newspaper. So to look at a big picture is something very interesting for us, because this gives us, and especially our students, the possibility to understand there is much more beyond the language itself, basically. So thank you very much. Thanks for such a wonderful seminar. I just wanted to remind everybody that, of course, this is going to be this was recorded, basically, so you are already there, and we're going to share this seminar also via our Facebook page and, of course, our SNSs. If you all agree, of course, because then it's actually your own, let's say, intellectual property as well. Maria Grazia, wonderful as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Good night, Victor and Jenifer.
Yeah,
okay,
good night to you.
Just one last thing. So next seminar is going to be the last seminar of this seminar series, and it's going to be held on the 23rd of February, and will be devoted to stylistics. So see you next time. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.